Good morning, everybody. How are we doing today? Welcome to the Film Center, Denver's only independent movie theater. I'm Keith Garcia, artistic director here at this great movie house, and welcome to CinemaQ Film Festival, our 17th chapter, and the final day of this iteration. You should both be excited and sad that the joy is coming to a closure today, but not forever. CinemaQ will return, just like James Bond, at the Denver Film Festival coming up this October 31st to November 9th. We'll always have a great selection of CinemaQ titles there. We'll be giving out the CinemaQ Le Bon Icon Award to a very deserving queer icon in the community in the world. So that is TBA, with all the other excitement of everything we'll announce for Denver Film Festival. But mark your calendars, take that time off of work right now, because you're going to need it to get through the great stuff we have coming for you. But task at hand, we are at the CinemaQ Film Festival, where we just watched a whole host of fantastic films, and now we're putting on a little panel discussion beforehand that we're calling Queer Elder Storytime. And essentially, we're just really looking, I'm 48. I'll just say that right now. I'm happy to be 48 years old. And I was questioning my possibility of being on this panel. Like, I was like, should I be on the panel? Should I do? And I'm happy to represent, because I get called a queer elder at 48, which I'll happily take. I feel that being an elder is kind of like wearing a little bit of a crown. You have a whole history behind you. You have things to teach. And just wisdom to expel. But some people told me, when you're 50, that's when we can actually claim to be an elder. So I was like, all right, I'll wait patiently 2 years to officially use the elder term for myself. But we've put together a great panel of fantastic elders who have great histories to share, great lessons for everyone to hear. And so let's get it started. So right now, I'd like to ask the moderator of our panel today to come down. And oh my God, I just asked you and it just left my head. So please introduce yourself. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Kaldes. I'm the CEO of Next50. Thank you for that introduction. I'm going to get us started. So we have some amazing panelists. Yes, it's true. You probably consider them to be elders. They might profess to be elders as well, but I don't think it's a one-way road here. I think we can share and learn from one another despite our ages, right? So let's start off with Joy Iwancio, Director of Transgender Services at the Center on Colfax. Joy, welcome. Michael Van Dalsem, Senior Americorps Companion Volunteer. Phil Nash, who is a well-known community activist and author of LGBTQ Denver, a book that will be available outside later. And Karen Collier, another wonderful community activist. Why don't you join us here on the panel? All right, so we're going to swap up a little bit here. Now, this is called Queer Elder Storytime, and you can imagine the stories that these folks have to share with all of us. But I'm going to read a little bit of the description just to get us settled here, centered rather. From underground clubs and coded language to radical resistance and representation, LGBTQ plus culture has grown from silos of secrecy to open advocacy and increased visibility. So today, we're going to talk about the evolution of all that, the endurance of all that, how we remain resilient, and really the richness that makes up queer life. So to get us started with this idea of, what has changed with age and what has remained the same, that's sort of our framing. Here's sort of the first theme. Sadly, we're being reminded that perhaps we need to be secret and go back into our caves and hide from reality and hide from the world, which isn't new to some of us who have perhaps lived through some of this. So I'm curious, on this theme of secrecy and survival and resilience and underground queer life, could some of you describe some of the ways in which the queer community lived and had to stay in hiding in the past? Who wants to take that?
I'm here.
Joy, you go first.
First, just a little more introduction about myself. I am 60-some years old. I am a trans woman, and I hail originally from Baltimore, Maryland. So you might hear some Baltimore stories or Baltimore accent if I get really comfortable with y'all. Back in the day, there was no internet. Yes, children. And where we went was the library. And so at the library, I looked through the card catalog, and I looked for any books about transgender people. And I think there was one book maybe in the library. It was probably a Magnus Hirschfeld book. And but the other thing that was in the card catalog was there were people who were in some of the secret societies would place little placeholders in the card catalog. And that's how you could find out. And often then it was just a post office box or something, and you wrote, and that's how I found out there were other transgender people in the world.
Joy, could you talk about secret societies? Because I suspect there might be some people who don't know what those are.
Oh, Well, well, back in the day, I remember one was called Try S, and these were, they labeled it heterosexual cross-dressers. But there were some transgender people who snuck in to the group because it was where we could find some community. And you had to pass an interview to then get invited to the meeting, right? So you met people at a restaurant or coffee shop, and then you were able to go to the meeting to find these other people. And then again, there was also pen pals and things, and there were magazines, zines, that were published. I actually had some of my exploits, stories published there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But did any of you get a secret decoder ring? Any secret societies you were part of? Michael?
No. Is this on?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I remember that from early on, there were a couple of societies called the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis. And those were still active when I first came out in 1969. I was not a member of either of those, but I did know people who were members. The Mattachine Society was very adamant about maintaining a straight appearance and straight acting. And I don't know too much more about them. And the Daughters of Bilitis, I believe, had the same sort of identity problems.
Others? Karen.
I'm Karen Collier, and I'm 70, claim every year of it. And I remember historically the understanding that when specifically women went out, to do so safely, assuming that they were a couple, one would dress as a man and pass as a male so that they could go out and have dinner and go dancing and basically enjoy a social life as a heterosexual couple. And that was kind of, I think maybe that was part of how, the whole butch idea kind of like took off, is to understand that was a way to be able to socialize safely out in the community.
Paul?
Phil.
Sorry.
Well, since everyone else is coming out about how old they are, I will be 75 next month. I'm planning to live to 100 because I don't want to get to 100 without a plan. One of the things that I write about in my book, LGBTQ Denver, which is I'll be selling outside here all afternoon. The earliest gay bars in Denver, the first known gay bar was in 1939, and it was hidden in the basement below a regular restaurant in downtown along 17th Street. So even into the 1970s, and bars moved around all the time. They were being in and out of businesses. The same bar owners would open a new bar someplace else a few months later. But almost all the bars, even when my now husband and I arrived here in 1976, many of the bars were off of alleys. They did not have front doors. You went into the alley to get to a bar. And often the bar didn't, in some places you had to ring a doorbell, and I understand in earlier times even give a password to be able to get in. As far as coded language or something like that, how many of you here have a friend named Dorothy?
Oh, yeah.
So there even, as I understand it, I haven't experienced it myself on cruise ships, but often there will be a party scheduled on a cruise ship for the Friends of Dorothy. So all of the Friends of Dorothy, who are the queer people on the ship, can show up at the bar at a certain time and get to know each other, find out who each other is. This even goes on now. So,
staying on language, because I think many of us, I'm 49 and having just turned 49 on Sunday, and owning every minute of it. I actually don't recall a time when I had to use coded language as an out gay man. So I'm wondering, can you give some more examples of that? Because I think...
Queen Supers.
Queen Supers. There you go. Any others?
Oh, chicken hawk, butterfly.
He's got a list.
Going back to Oscar Wilde's time, the green carnation in your lapel was a signal that you were a member of the club. I wrote down a lot of other things here. Clones, San Francisco in the 70s and 80s, there was the gay clone. There was just one look. It was a mustache and kind of bushy hair.
In New York as well.
Butch, femme, gaydar, fag hag. They're just, go to Wikipedia and look up LGBTQ slang, and you will see an entire almost dictionary of terms.
Yeah, and when we think about why did we have to code like this, and why did we have to have secret societies, and why did we have to have clubs that were unmarked? And it's in part because of fear, but also there was a lot of grief as well, and it felt as though this community knew how to deal with the grief and didn't really share it. But I want to touch on that because many of you have lived through the AIDS crisis in your generation. Some of you may not have even imagined living to be 70, 80, or 90. And I'm wondering, how did the crisis shift your perception of advocacy and the need to be more or less secretive? Can we talk a little bit about the impact of grief and activism?
I forgot to say that I'm 72. Thank you. I was a volunteer visiting hospitals during the AIDS crisis. And it came to be very clear, very quickly, that each person had value, that each person deserved to be known for who they are. And in that regard, I began to be more out myself and introduce myself as out. I started coming out when I was 16. And there was a sort of a fraternity in Lawrence, Kansas. And a friend of mine took me there, and they all decided that I was gay. And a couple of nights later, I proved it.
Go ahead, Karen.
In the late 90s, as a result of the HIV and AIDS epidemic, it became clear to a group of whom we were a chapter. It was called the Black Gay and Lesbian Leadership Forum out of Los Angeles, California. And they focused on HIV prevention and care for AIDS patients. So we began a nonprofit called Out for Life Colorado and did HIV prevention in the African American community primarily. And a couple of things come to mind when I think about that time, primarily that there was an active kind of exclusivity that affected the black community, and we weren't called queer, but I'll call them queer now. And although we could go to the bars, sometimes we were harassed, had to have several means of identification, had to be dressed a certain way. And this HIV affected the black community in the same fashion that it did the white community. But the prevention models really didn't work in the black community, primarily because, first of all, black men weren't out, did not profess to be gay, and in fact, in a lot of cases, they could have been considered bisexual, except that we weren't really accepting those kind of labels because we could not afford to be out. We were in families. A lot of us were married and had children, and the term down low finally came into existence. But before then, men were having sex with men and women, as well as in the penal institutions. Men were having sex with men and then coming to their families when they came out. And although they tested for HIV going in, they did not test for it coming out. So a lot of those men did not know that they were positive and went home to their wives, and promptly the wives became HIV positive. And we saw a lot of women who needed care and, frankly, support. So that was kind of what I saw in the black community. And something very specific to me indicated just how devastating it was to be positive when so many men were dying. People would not touch people who were known to either have HIV or to be living with AIDS and also dying with AIDS. And so in the black community, the men specifically would greet each other with a kiss because no one would touch them. And they wanted to make sure that in the black community, we had a way of accepting everyone despite what their status was.
I want to stay here on advocacy because I think some of the most powerful movements came out of this really dark time in our public health. And I'm wondering if we could just talk a little bit about how perhaps you personally contributed to the advocacy, if at all, and why or why not, or what were some really good examples of advocates that you admired that we can learn from and that younger generations can learn from.
Well, I can contribute here. I did a little research to get some numbers. 700,000 people in the United States died of AIDS. That's not worldwide, that's not North America, that's the United States. 55% were gay men. That's 385,000 gay and bisexual men who were lost to AIDS. Now, for comparison, 407,000 people, men died, well, men and women, died in World War II, and 620,000 in the Civil War. That is a staggering loss. And while it was all going on, and getting back to advocacy, This was a cleansing by neglect. And the people that brought this to light, the activists that brought this to light, was ACT UP by protesting and laying down in the street and doing, the most outrageous kinds of antics to bring attention to the fact that the administration of Ronald Reagan in the 1980s the man never even uttered the word AIDS until about 1985 or 86, 3 or 4 years at least into the epidemic. And this just think about how quickly we jumped on COVID, but how slowly anybody was willing to get involved in addressing the what was then called the AIDS crisis. Even before that, it was called gay cancer and HTLV and LAV and so forth. So this is it was ACT UP that really brought about some real changes in how just pointing up the long delay in getting research done and care provided. And this is all in a climate of the rise of the Christian right, who in these times said that really all these gay men just brought it on themselves because they violated God's will.
Any other advocates? Karen, do you have anyone in mind?
Phil Wilson comes to mind for me, and Phil has been involved in the advocacy, for I'd say a good 50 years. He ran a very large nonprofit that focused on HIV prevention in Los Angeles, California, and really helped develop the research that resulted in an understanding that the labels that were used to identify risk factors did not work in the brown and black communities, because again, we didn't want to identify for fear of backlash from our families as well as the community. So we talked about the behavior, and one in particular that they coined was MSM, men who had sex with men. And so when questioning in way of exploring risk factors that a person may have, instead of asking, are you gay or are you lesbian, we would ask, do you have sex with men? And we got a much clearer understanding of risk factors and the numbers when we came away from using those labels and talked about behaviors. And that was something that we advocated that the health department really didn't embrace until after it became obvious by looking at the numbers that were generated with the kinds of surveys and questions asked when talking to men specifically, and women as well, because there was a perception that lesbian women didn't have sex with men, and certainly not claim to be a lesbian. I mean, you could have your lesbian card snatched if anyone ever knew that you were being sexual with men, but that happened all the time. And again, we were not able to really track the kind of numbers in terms of the risk factor if we talked about labels, if we only used labels. So there was always, and these conversations happened in very private areas, and we talked about behavior and not the labels.
In Baltimore, one of the things that came out of the AIDS epidemic, and I lost 2 friends to AIDS, is organizations in Baltimore. It was called HERO, the Health Education Resource Organization, nonprofit. and they stressed on education and trying to get treatment and some cures, something developed. So that was their advocacy. But I remember one of the things that was the first thing that happened in Baltimore, and maybe I don't know if it happened here in Denver, but we would have AIDS walks. These were fundraisers, like you had the muscular dystrophy walk, or I'm trying to think the Coma Cure walk. Well, there were AIDS walks where we raised money for Hero in Baltimore.
We're about to segue in about 10 minutes or so for questions from the audience. So start thinking about really good questions for this panel. So out of this advocacy, this tremendous advocacy, there was some amazing visibility created for the first time ever. And I'm wondering, on this theme of invisibility, visibility, and then have we gotten a little overexposed? That's the question I have here. So what does queer representation mean today versus what it meant 20, 30, 40 years ago? Let's start with that.
I would just like to append one comment on to what Joy was talking about with the AIDS walk. The AIDS walk was discontinued a few years ago, but this coming Thursday, is it Thursday? Yeah, Thursday, August 14th, 4 to 8 p.m. at the Cheeseman Pavilion, there is going to be a display of the Names Project AIDS quilt. So for those who are interested in learning more and experiencing what some of the feelings were about all of this, Thursday, 4 p.m., Cheeseman Park.
Do you want to go back to the visibility question?
Visibility question, are we overexposed? So I had the privilege, I don't know if this is going to directly answer the question. I had the privilege of knowing Harry Hay, who was one of the founders of the Mattachine Society. He made friends here in Denver back in the late 70s and early 80s, and I got to hear this great mentor talking about what are we here for? What are we queer people here for? Certainly there's some purpose for us to be here. But he said, one thing about us, we just don't know when to quit. and I do think that that's possibly true. I think, the fact that the trans issues were brought up late in the last presidential campaign as a way to really, cement the conservative vote and say Democrats are crazy, look at what they're talking about. Trans people are just mentally ill, that's all. I wonder if we're going to play in that arena, do we really understand all that is involved with that? And I might get canceled for saying that, but I just wonder about the speed with which we're trying to go forward.
Yes. as a trans woman and reading these postmortems and how it's my fault or my community's fault that this evildoer got elected, I've read plenty of stuff, and you can watch a great interview with Sarah McBride, who was elected to Congress as a trans woman from Delaware. Yay. She has a great interview in the New York Times, and even she's very practical. But what she stresses in her book is that getting to know people one-on-one and just getting to know me as a person, that kind of visibility first, is that when people get to know me, and they're going, and then maybe they find out I'm transgender, maybe they read me right away, I don't know. And it's up to me when to disclose. And each one of the members of my community when to disclose that we are trans. But I also feel I'm walking this line between being, okay, quiet, just don't rock the boat. Just do my best to just be Joy, human being, woman, and not identify as trans. But on the other hand, I feel that part of my role is to be an ambassador and that I can be that link that then they can say, whoa, whoa. Like sometimes I'll ask people, do you know any transgender people? And they'll shake their head, no. I say, you do now. You know one, And and what we need more than ever is allies. And I stress this at the Pride Festival. I gave out hundreds of ally buttons to say that's what we need. Because if when allies speak up, it's not us, like we're pushing to and that's how we got, I believed, civil marriage, was because we had allies who said, wait a minute, you're saying that my brother can't get married? My son? My daughter? And it was having those family members, my friend, those kind of connections that made it real and human. And so we need more humanity among allies and among the general public I'm just a human, I just want to exist. Please stop trying to erase me.
I don't know if I was going to run out of hands to applaud with.
Thank you.
Joy, you're bringing up a really important point within the queer community that comes up and has come up since day one, which is how do we as a community embrace one another and actually tell the diverse stories that make up our community and do it in a way that values everyone equally. And clearly this election has disappointed a lot of members of our community. And I think I want to ask a question about the role of media here. And how has media in all sorts of forms helped to either elevate the diversity in the queer space or further polarize us?
Well, I will say that one of the problems that we face around why trans identity is not well embraced is because so much of that history has already been erased. If you go anywhere, many places in the world, to any point in history in the world, you will find that there are gender variant people. And we don't know this. We never learn this. And that's why people like members of my family, who are many of them Trump voters, don't think they know anybody who's trans. They've never learned that there was anything but male, female, and mostly straight. So erasure is a much deeper issue than just what's happening now. It is erasure of all of our history and the failure of the failure, not just the deliberate failure, the deliberate removal, as is happening right now, that has been happening all along. We don't know about the Hijra in India because we were never taught about them. We never knew about the Mushe in Mexico because we were never taught about them. And these are communities of gender variant people that we just never learned about. But of course, we don't learn about other cultures in the United States anyway. So.
I think that could be a whole panel on just media, I think, because we've seen a progression over time when there was largely just network TV, and then you see a gay or lesbian character in a sitcom that it's their sitcom. It isn't just a quick character, right? And then the general American public would be exposed to that, kind of like, oh yeah, that's fine. It's just folks we know. They seem just like us, right? That humanity kind of thing. And now we've become so polarized in our media, so much we don't have one network or something. It's all these little compartments of media. We still thankfully have wonderful independent film. Yay, thank you, C Film Theater, for that. And seeing our lives on the screen is educational and affirming.
I often say that I wouldn't have been able to get married but for Will and Grace happening.
Yeah.
Right? And so I'm wondering, what do you think has to happen to keep these stories top of mind?
One of the things I have taught is digital storytelling, and there's still the Center for Digital Storytelling, who sees storytelling as a way of advocacy. And these are compressed 3 to 4 minute stories that are told in first person and have power because of it being first person. It's my story. And by sharing those stories, again, the humanity can come out. Now, how those can be shared exponentially, I don't know. We have to think about that.
Karen?
I think that we have suffered with the ignorance of the medical community for far too long. We've got a certain suppression that has actively occurred around sexuality since the beginning of time, practically, so that we don't have the concentration that we deserve on women and sexuality, nor do we have it, but to a lesser extent with men. And it's very unfortunate because we medically suffer with that ignorance. And we have not explored sexuality as a subject matter. Sexuality is on TV for our entertainment, but it's unfortunate that we are not more serious about it. And as I say, I think that we all physically pay a price for that.
Well said, Karen. Yeah.
So, Michael, did you want to add?
I was just going to say, I was talking with somebody the other day who said that the doctor never talked to them about sex. And I think that's not an uncommon experience. When was the last time your doctor asked you if you should have tests done?
Well, they stop after a certain age, don't they?
They do stop after a certain age.
Unless you
Fortunately, I
talk
have one
back.
who regularly tests my blood. But then the first thing I said to him when I got a new doctor was, "I'm gay. You got a problem with that?" And he didn't, so we're good.
Can we, Michael, I want to stay with you a little bit and switch to our next topic, our final theme before we get to Q&A here. And that is about generational differences. And what do you think has changed most about queer culture?
Just the fact that people are more out. People are willing to be out in public and be themselves and represent who they are and who their compatriots are. We had, well, I've never been all that hard to figure out. But it was always difficult to find one another when we did not know who we were. And yes, we had coded words in which we had looks and winks and just kind of knowing one another. One of the things I was thinking about when we got our themes talked about was sometimes it was difficult to find out if somebody else was gay without going to bed with them. And sometimes you really didn't want that. So I don't know. I think that's all I have to say about that.
There'll be a second episode on Michael's stories. Yeah, that's coming up later today. Others, what's changed? Karen, what's changed for you?
Just the identification now. I mean, I recall when the word queer was designed to offend, and it was a very hurtful term. And now here we are, the queer community, the queer this, queer that, and the kind of embrace that we see now. I mean, it's very interesting to see that.
How does that make you feel?
It's been a transition for me. Those terms, they still hurt. It was very interesting growing up. My brother was kind of nerdy, and I was a tomboy. So they called him a queer, and he wasn't. He just, he was just a very quiet, nerdy kid, you know, and it hurt my feelings to hear him called that, you know, and so now trying to, you know, think about it in a more positive way has required work on my part, because it still kind of triggers me a little bit, you know.
There's a lot of head nodding. Go ahead, Phil.
You know, the word queer is not just a word. The way you heard queer was queer, or effing queer, or filthy queer. There was always an adjective, there was always a sneer when I was growing up. It was not just a neutral term. And oh, by the way, we never voted on whether queer would become the way that we would talk about our community, because there are still a number of people of my generation who completely resist the idea of using it. I have started using it. The humorist David Sedaris has talked about this extensively, and he said, "I just give up." I just give up. And that's how I kind of feel about it too. So, yeah, that's...
Certainly generational, the language has evolved, and we have many new terms, and terms that we've discarded, and terms that we've tried to reclaim. As far as being out, what Michael talked about too, was that something that's changed. And when I hear these folks who say, well, these what's with this epidemic of trans kids, right? What it is that they felt safe to come out finally. Yay. And I think they should feel safe to come out. And that is what has changed.
Do you think that younger generations appreciate the power of that word queer? In other words, there seems to be a lot of misunderstanding between older generations and younger generations about what queer meant to folks growing up and how traumatized they are by that term, such that, I mean, every one of you have sort of said, you know, you're still dealing with accepting that term, and language is really important in our community. So I'm wondering, how can we further share our experiences that would help a younger generation understand why we may look a little recalcitrant or hesitant in adopting all this new terminology?
It's because it's been used against us so often. We have, have avoidance behaviors to be not called queer, to be not called a homo, to be regular, to be not noticed. And that's a behavior that is falling away, fortunately, but it's still with some of us. Yeah.
Queer is a lot easier to say than 2S LGBTQIUA plus. That's a lot of syllables. Queer is just one syllable, so that's the selling point for me.
Yep. Yeah, I'm in.
Karen?
I think opportunities like this are very helpful in terms of talking about our stories and being willing to be intergenerational in our interaction, so that we are not existing in silos and everyone has a different idea based on their age, but coming together and talking about how it is today, and not necessarily versus, but to say, and this is how it was back in the day, and being okay with coming together and talking about that, being given the space.
I love intergenerational experiences. And the young volunteers at the center, I learn new words from them all the time. So when I found out I had Riz, I was very excited.
There's just one other thing I want to say that's on maybe more of a serious note. Up until about the 1990s, our movement was pretty much all volunteer. It was volunteers taking on well-funded organizations like the Southern Baptist Church, the Republican Party, the U.S. government, the psychiatric institutions, the medical establishment, you name it. We were volunteers back then. The professionalization of our movement started probably in the late 1990s when people like Tim Gill here in Denver started funding LGBTQ organizations and other philanthropists around the country and so forth. So now young people can aspire to a career working in the movement and be paid well for it. How many of you here have done some volunteer work? Good for you. I mean, I do think the character of the movement has changed a lot from the time when it was all volunteer until now where it has been professionalized.
I want to turn to the audience because I suspect there are some questions. Any questions? Yes.
Oh no, not her.
No, please. And project for the back.
And project. Okay,
Oh,
I
you
could
could
do
do
that. So I guess my question for the panel is, I think most of us have one of those in our family, which is a Trumper. And if you don't, you're lucky. And my sister went to visit another sister who's a Trumper, and what has occurred to me is we're in ecosystems. That the issues are no longer what's talked about, but it's like, I'd rather lose my job than have my kid go to school and come back a different sex, because that's what the spin is. I mean, some of the things that come out of her mouth are just incredible. So I guess I'm getting to the point where I don't know that I can change her or that bubble. They really don't want to know what I have to say. But how do we move forward? Because I'm almost thinking we need to still celebrate who we are in the midst of, instead of the false idea that we could change them. And how do we move forward? I mean, because I think we're going into the dark ages. Could I say something? Hi, Mary. Oh, hi.
Hi, Mary. Hi, Avis.
I know I'm not on the panel, but I'd love to answer that because buttons have been pushed already by Phil saying, well, maybe we ought to look at how quickly we're doing these things and these advances. Yeah. Bull. I will quote my good friend Cheryl, who's a trans woman. Now is the time to be flamboyant. Okay. Now is not the time to back away. We got too much going against us. And please let us not talk about how divided we are without talking about the algorithms. The algorithms are pumping that crap into them all day, every day. Okay? And how are we going to counter that?
So these are all really important points, and I think it gets to some of the themes we talked about. So for the four of you, how do we coexist?
My sister says we have different worldviews. Now, I know that's jargon. However, all I can do with her, and I think with everybody else, is be who I am authentically. Do not confront unnecessarily unless, there's a direct attack against me. I just need to be able to be human in front of these people, to have them see me as human, to have them not deny my humanity.
Joy?
Absolutely. Thanks, Mary, and thanks, Avis. It is the humanity, by us showing your humanity, by us not succumbing and becoming invisible, or among my community, even ending your life because you don't see a way out. And if we do that, then they win, right? So I think it is time to be visible and show our humanity. I have tried with my Trumper family people to look for common ground, and try to find a few things that we might be able to agree on and maybe build from that. But attacking them doesn't, I assure you, personally attacking people doesn't work. I can't win them over. But by living my life with dignity and grace and responsibly and being that example, maybe it can seep in at some time.
And not apologizing.
Right.
Never, ever apologizing.
Yeah, I would say that one of the things we always have to keep in mind is that the divisions that are being created are being done for a very deliberate, dark, greedy, awful, horrible reason, and that our humanity amongst us is much more powerful if we understand that we're being manipulated, and so are they, and that what really counts is that in a crisis, families will pull together, friends will stand up for each other, will dig each other out of the snowstorm, but these criminals that are dividing our country, and there's to some extent on both sides, but more on one side way more on one side than the other, are really deliberately manipulating us to have these feelings for the sake of power and money.
Yep. Other questions? Yes, sir.
So this was brought up with the ACT UP during the AIDS crisis. The community came together, particularly the women in the lesbian community, and it really helped gay men. Do you see any of that happening now with attacks against the transgender community? And believe me, we're next on the hit list. Trust me. The gay and lesbian community is next after they get done with the trans community. So is there any evidence of that coalescing happening?
Anybody? Looks like not much.
Yeah.
So we need to come together. I think that's been stressed, and we need to stand up for each other, and we do need those allies.
Yeah, it's more powerful, isn't it, if the allies sometimes are louder than those who are being attacked,
Yes.
right? There's real power in that. Yes, sir.
I think the terminology that we're using today is illustrative. That is that, I've been around for close to 50 years here, and when we started the community center, it was called the GCCC, the Gay Community Center of Colorado. And then it became the GLCCC, and then the GLB, and then the GLT, and all these letters, and now, by golly, it's just the center on Colfax. And that's not only something that we should bear in mind, that we are the center of our lives as the gender variant community, but we're also the center of the United States. And that's just an important concept. When I came out, we were using all these coded languages, things like that. And that emphasized to us that we had to find one another in a mysterious kind of a way. But we don't have to do that. And we haven't for decades. Think about that.
Yeah, and there's great power in community, and that's where we find support. And speaking of the center where I work, when folks come into our transgender support group, and for some of them, they walk in, it's the first time they've been in a room with that many transgender people. They're coming in from other states, and they're finding community. And we need to have more community.
We have time for one more question.
So, this is all very, it's very alive for me because when I was 6, my mom was a nurse in an HIV clinic. She was volunteering. And she took me, and this is what frames my perspective. It's framed my perspective my whole life. She took me, and I met someone, and I shook his hand, and they, folks who were there didn't see kids often. Now I know that, looking back. I shook his hand, and he was so excited to see a kid, and just like all the love that kids have to offer. And my pants, I had an itch on my leg right then, and so right after I shook his hand, I slapped my leg and started wiping my hand on my pants. And his face, it lives in my heart. The devastation, and not having the words as a 6-year-old to say, I'm itching, I'm sorry, and for me that shapes my advocacy and the way I approach things every day. But what I see is, and especially for you, Karen, you spoke to this, is the silos of advocacy and the silos and the dueling fiddles of importance in activism. I'm wondering, how are we working, and this is an incredible panel because it bridges both the ageism and the LGBTQ section of, right? But when we look at Black and Brown and Asian and LGBTQ, what is your advice from this lens, from the ground you've traveled, on breaking through the silos to coalesce? Because we often just get in these spaces together and we can't seem to let go of who's first.
Yeah, how do we build coalitions?
I think it's the same thing as trying to deal with Trumpers. Feature your humanity. We are the same. We have so many things in common, so much more in common than we do have differences. And that's where our power lies, I think. That's where our community is. The fact that we're all human together. We may be variant. We may be something that other people don't like. So what? We do have an obligation to one another to support each other because that we want that support for ourselves.
Phil?
We need to start having more fun. I mean, coalition building is hard and it can be frustrating and it can make people mad. I really think there are a lot of emerging cultural things going on. Oh, for example, CinemaQ that is showing movies and having parties and bringing us together in places like this to have these discussions. That political activism is hard, it's tough, it's not for everybody. But Andy Scahill, the guy who's doing these movies, backyard movies down at Champagne Tiger, the Lavender Hill Cultural District that's being developed along Colfax and Broadway. Just a lot of different ways of coming together that are not trying to address all these deadly serious issues and just having fun and learning from each other. And the rooftop parties at the center. So gay doesn't, we've gotten so serious for being so gay, I mean, it's just.
Joy is an act of resistance.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like Cowboy Avi. Wow, what a fun character you've created, Avis. It's.
So.
Oh, I'm not supposed to. Avi. Okay. All right. Anyway, just
Phil.
the talent night.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, and because we're out of time, I actually want to end on a joyous question. I didn't tell you all about this final question. So, here's your final question, and I hope each of you feel comfortable answering it, because if not, this moderator is not doing a good job. What's the best part about getting old?
Wisdom, not caring about what people think.
Getting old. Getting old. The best part of getting old is getting old, as opposed to the alternative.
Knowing that I've survived, that I will survive, that I've faced pretty much all that I'm going to face, and it's not going to get any worse.
Mine's a little X-rated. Growing up, learning that, masturbation is bad and so forth, having your doctor saying, at your age, you just need to ejaculate more.
There you go.
Thank you for joining us today. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. Enjoy the rest of CinemaQ. Thank you very much.